The champagne glass shattered against the marble floor, echoing the exact moment a marriage ended. 300 of New York's elite stared in silence at the pregnant woman trembling in a simple, thrift store dress, while her husband pointed a manicured finger at her face, laughing cruelly. He thought he was the king of the world that night. He believed his plain, quiet wife was nothing more than an anchor dragging him down. But he didn't check the guest list. If he had, he would have seen the 3 names that strike fear into Wall Street. 3 brothers who were landing on the roof right now, coming to remind him exactly who he had just insulted. The rain battered against the singular, grimy window of the 4th-floor walk-up in Queens. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of burnt toast and the palpable tension of a marriage hanging by a thread. Sarah adjusted the waistband of her maternity dress. It was a soft, powder-blue cotton piece she had bought at a second-hand store 3 months ago. At 7 months pregnant, her options were limited, and their bank account was even more restricted. She smoothed the fabric over her stomach, feeling the baby kick, a small reassurance in a world that felt increasingly hostile. "Are you seriously wearing that?" The voice sliced through the room like a serrated knife. David stood in the doorway of their cramped bathroom, aggressively drying his hair with a towel. He was a handsome man, classically so, with a jawline that could cut glass and eyes that used to look at Sarah with adoration, but now only held contempt. Sarah looked down at her dress. "It's clean, David, and it's the only thing that fits right now. The elastic on my black trousers snapped last week." David scoffed, throwing the towel onto the unmade bed. He walked over to the closet, a cheap, particle-board wardrobe that leaned precariously to the left, and pulled out his tuxedo. It was a rental, but a high-end one. He had spent $300 on the rental, money they had set aside for the crib. "It's the Merriweather Merger Gala, Sarah," David snapped, stepping into his trousers. "Do you have any idea who is going to be there? The CEO of Blackwood Inc., the investors from Dubai. My entire promotion depends on tonight. I need to look like a partner, not a charity case. And I need a wife who looks like she belongs on a yacht, not in a soup kitchen." Sarah felt the familiar sting of tears, but swallowed them back. She had learned over the last 2 years that crying only made David angrier. He despised weakness, or what he perceived as weakness. "I can stay home," she whispered, half hoping he would agree. David froze, buttoning his crisp white shirt. He turned to her, his expression twisting into a sneer. "And have everyone ask why my wife isn't there? Have them think I'm having marital problems? No, you're coming. Just try to stand in the back. Don't speak unless spoken to. And for God's sake, hide that scuffed purse." He didn't know. That was the irony that Sarah lived with every single day. David Miller, the ambitious junior analyst who checked the stock market 600 times a day, had absolutely no idea that the woman standing in front of him, the woman he berated for buying generic brand cereal, was Sarah Kensington. The Kensingtons weren't just rich, they were an institution. Her father, Lord Arthur Kensington Sr., had built a shipping and logistics empire that spanned the globe. When he died, he left everything to his 4 children. Sarah was the youngest, the only girl, and the apple of her brother's eyes. But she had walked away from it all 3 years ago. She had been tired of men who only looked at her and saw dollar signs. She wanted to be loved for her, not the Kensington Trust Fund. So she changed her name, moved to a modest neighborhood, and took a job as a librarian. That's where she met David. In the beginning, David had been charming. He was hungry for success, yes, but he seemed kind. He brought her flowers picked from the park. They ate pizza on the floor. When he proposed, Sarah thought she had found her fairy tale, a man who loved her while thinking she had nothing. She had been planning to tell him the truth on their first anniversary. But by then the mask had started to slip. David didn't get the promotion he wanted. He started drinking more. He started blaming her for their poverty. He became obsessed with status, constantly comparing their lives to the partners at his firm. Now, 2 years in, she was pregnant, and the man she loved had turned into a stranger who viewed her as a liability. "I'm ready," Sarah said softly, grabbing her worn beige coat. David looked her up and down, shaking his head. "You look like a maid," he muttered, grabbing his car keys. "Let's go. We're taking the subway to 59th Street, then we'll grab a cab so we can be seen arriving in a car. I'm not paying for a cab all the way from Queens." Sarah followed him out the door, her hand resting protectively on her belly. She checked her phone one last time. There was a text message from an unsaved number, but she knew exactly who it was. "Arthur. We're in town. Thomas says you haven't answered his emails. We're worried, Sarah. Let us see you." She quickly deleted the message and turned off her phone. Tonight was about David's career. She would play the role of the supportive, invisible wife one last time. She just prayed she could survive the night without breaking down. The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel was a kaleidoscope of diamonds, silk, and ruthless ambition. Crystal chandeliers, the size of small cars, hung from the gold-leafed ceiling, casting a warm, flattering light on the social climbers and old-money dynasties of New York City. When their yellow taxi pulled up to the curb, David made a show of tipping the driver loudly, ensuring the doorman saw it. He adjusted his bow tie in the reflection of the window, his posture shifting instantly from the slumped, angry husband to the upright, confident corporate shark. "Smile," he hissed at Sarah as he grabbed her elbow, a little too tightly, "and pull your coat off. The coat check is to the left. Meet me inside. I see Mr. Henderson." "David, wait," Sarah started, struggling to get out of the cab with her baby bump. But he was already gone, striding up the red carpet, a magnet drawn to the steel of power. Sarah let out a shaky breath. She handed her coat to the attendant, revealing the blue cotton dress. In the apartment, it had looked simple. Here, amidst gowns of velvet and custom-tailored silk, it looked exactly what it was: cheap. She felt the eyes of the women in line boring into her. "Is she a waitress?" one woman whispered loudly to a companion. "No, the waitstaff is wearing black. Maybe she's a charity case they invited for the tax write-off." Sarah kept her head down, clutching her clutch so hard her knuckles turned white. She walked into the ballroom, the wall of sound hitting her instantly. Jazz music, clinking glasses, and the roar of superficial conversation. She scanned the room for David. It wasn't hard to find him. He was standing near the ice sculpture, laughing too loudly at a joke made by a short, balding man in a tuxedo that cost more than David's annual salary. But David wasn't alone. Standing intimately close to him was Jessica. Jessica Vance was everything Sarah wasn't. Tall, razor-sharp, and draped in a blood-red dress that clung to her artificial curves like a second skin. She was a senior associate at David's firm, and the woman David constantly compared Sarah to. "Jessica closed $1 million deal today," he would say over dinner. "Jessica goes to the gym at 5 a.m. Sarah waddled over, her feet already aching in her discount heels. As she approached the circle, David's eyes flickered to her. For a split second, she saw panic, followed immediately by irritation. "Ah, and this is—" David paused. He actually paused. He couldn't bring himself to say "my wife" in front of the partners. "This is Sarah. She's with me." The short man, Mr. Henderson, looked Sarah up and down, his eyes lingering on her stomach. "With you? Oh, congratulations, David. I didn't realize you were expecting. When is the due date?" Before Sarah could speak, Jessica laughed. It was a cold, tinkling sound. "Oh, David has such a big heart, doesn't he? Always taking in strays." Sarah helps manage the domestic side of things, while David conquers the market. It was a masterful insult. She hadn't technically lied, but she had implied Sarah was the help, or perhaps a burdensome girlfriend, certainly not an equal partner. David didn't correct her. He laughed along. "She tries her best," David said, taking a sip of his whiskey, refusing to look Sarah in the eye. Sarah, why don't you go find the buffet? I'm sure you're hungry. Pregnant women always are, right? He was dismissing her, like a child. I'm actually fine, David, Sarah said, her voice quiet but steady. I'd love to hear about the merger. You said Mr. Blackwood was going to be here? David's face darkened. He stepped closer to her, turning his back to Mr. Henderson and Jessica, so only Sarah could see the venom in his expression. Don't, he whispered harshly. Don't you dare try to talk business. You don't know the first thing about mergers. You're a librarian, Sarah. Go sit down somewhere before you embarrass me. Mr. Blackwood is the owner of the entire conglomerate. If he sees you waddling around in that rag, he'll think I make poor decisions. Go. Sarah felt a physical blow to her chest. It wasn't just the cruelty. It was the stupidity. If David only knew. Mr. Blackwood, Charles Blackwood, was her godfather. He had bounced Sarah on his knee when she was a toddler. The merger David was so desperate to secure was a merger with Kensington Logistics, the company her brothers now ran. She looked at her husband, really looked at him. She saw the sweat beading on his upper lip, the desperation in his eyes, the hollowness of his soul. David, she said, a strange calm settling over her. You need to be careful tonight. Excuse me? He looked incredulous. I'm serious. Be careful who you insult. You never know who is listening. David rolled his eyes. Go away, Sarah, I mean it. He turned back to Jessica, who placed a possessive hand on his bicep. Don't worry about her, David. Focus on the prize. I heard the Kensington brothers might actually make an appearance tonight. If we can get FaceTime with them, your partnership is guaranteed. The Kensingtons? David's eyes lit up like a child on Christmas. I thought they never left London. Special occasion, Jessica purred. Imagine if we landed that account. The commission alone. Sarah turned and walked away. She navigated through the crowd, feeling like a ghost. She found a secluded table near the balcony doors and sat down, her hand trembling as she reached for a glass of water. She pulled her phone out from her clutch. She turned it on. 3 missed calls, all from William. She stared at the screen. She had spent 3 years running from her name, trying to prove that love was stronger than money. She had wanted to prove that she could build a life without the Kensington safety net. But looking at David across the room, fawning over Jessica and laughing at the expense of his pregnant wife, she realized her experiment had failed. She hadn't found true love. She had found a man who loved himself, and she had enabled him by making herself small. It was time to stop being small. She unlocked her phone and typed a simple message to the group chat named the trio. Sarah, you can come in now. The response was immediate. Thomas, ETA 4 minutes. We're bringing the thunder. Sarah set the phone down. She watched David across the room. He was high-fiving a colleague, completely unaware that the ground beneath his feet was about to crumble. The clock on the wall read 8:15 p.m. By 8:30 p.m., David Miller's life as he knew it would be over. The gala moved into its second phase, the charity auction. This was the moment where the peacocks fanned their feathers, using obscene amounts of money to buy useless items just to prove they could. David had dragged Sarah to a table near the front, though he forced her to sit in a chair slightly behind his, blocked by a large floral centerpiece of white lilies. He sat next to Jessica, their shoulders brushing. To anyone observing, David and Jessica were the power couple, and Sarah was the dowdy assistant taking notes. The auctioneer, a man with a British accent that sounded as rented as David's tuxedo, took the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, the next item is a vintage 1962 Dalmore whiskey, one of only 12 bottles in existence. Bidding starts at $10,000. David leaned forward, his eyes hungry. He whispered to Jessica, Blackwood loves Scotch. If I win this bottle and gift it to him personally tonight. That's the partnership. That's the ticket. Sarah leaned forward, her heart hammering against her ribs. David, she whispered, tugging on the sleeve of his jacket. We don't have $10,000. The credit cards are maxed out from the rental and the hotel deposit. David swatted her hand away like a buzzing fly. Quiet. You don't understand leverage. I buy this, I get the promotion. The bonus covers the debt 3 times over. It's an investment. $15,000 to the gentleman in the grey suit, the auctioneer shouted. David raised his paddle. $18,000. David, stop! Sarah's voice rose a little louder this time, panic setting in. We have $2,000 in the savings account. That is for the hospital bills. If you do this, we can't pay rent next month. Jessica turned around, a look of faux pity plastered on her face. Oh, honey, don't worry. David is a winner. You really need to stop thinking so small. It's unattractive. Shut up, Jessica, Sarah snapped. It was the first time she had ever spoken back. David turned, his face flushed with a mix of adrenaline and rage. $20,000, he yelled to the stage, not even looking at the auctioneer. He was staring at Sarah. If you embarrass me one more time, Sarah, I swear to God. I'm trying to save you, Sarah pleaded. Please, think about the baby. $25,000 from Mr. Henderson, the auctioneer called out. David's hand shot up. $30,000. The room murmured. $30,000 was a lot, even for this crowd, for a bottle of whiskey. David didn't have $30,000. He didn't have $30 to spare. He was gambling with money that didn't exist, on a future he hadn't earned. David, put the hand down, Sarah said, standing up. Her legs were shaking. She couldn't let him do this. It was fraud. It was ruin. She reached for his arm to physically lower the paddle. David snapped. The pressure he had been under for months, the resentment of her pregnancy, the desire to be like the wealthy men around him, it all boiled over. He didn't just push her hand away. He stood up and shoved her. It wasn't a violent punch, but it was a forceful, dismissive shove, designed to clear an obstacle. Sarah, off balance due to the pregnancy and the cheap heels, stumbled back. Her hip checked the waiter passing by with a tray of champagne. Crash! The sound was like a gunshot in the hushed room. The waiter went down. Sarah fell hard onto the marble floor, landing on her side to protect her stomach. A dozen crystal flutes shattered around her, drenching her blue cotton dress in sticky golden champagne. The music stopped. The auctioneer froze. 300 pairs of eyes turned to the scene. Sarah lay there, gasping, checking her stomach instinctively. A shard of glass had grazed her cheek, leaving a thin line of blood. She looked up, expecting David to rush to her, to help her up, to ask if the baby was okay. David stood above her, but he wasn't looking at her with concern. He was looking at his tuxedo trousers, which had a few drops of champagne on the hem. He looked at Mr. Blackwood, who was watching from the front row with an unreadable expression. David decided in that split second that his reputation was worth more than his wife. "Look what you've done!" David roared, pointing a manicured finger at her face. His voice echoed off the vaulted ceilings. "You clumsy, pathetic woman! I told you to stay home. I told you you didn't belong here." Sarah pushed herself up on one elbow, tears stinging her eyes. "David, I fell. You pushed me." "I didn't touch you," David lied, playing to the crowd. He looked around, spreading his arms. "She's unstable. It's the hormones. I'm so sorry, everyone. My wife. She's having a hard time. She's not used to this environment." He looked down at her with pure disgust. "Get up. Get out. You've ruined everything, just like you always do. Go wait in the car. I can't even look at you right now." Jessica stepped forward, handing David a napkin. "Oh, David, I'm so sorry you have to deal with this," she said loud enough for the table to hear. "Security? Can someone help this woman out? She's clearly making a scene." The humiliation was total. It was a physical weight, pressing Sarah into the shards of glass. She looked at the man she had married, the father of her child. He wasn't just selfish. He was cruel. He was willing to sacrifice her dignity to save face in front of strangers. Sarah slowly got to her knees. A waiter, the only person with a shred of decency, reached out a hand to help her. "Mom, are you okay?" Sarah nodded, wiping the blood from her cheek. She didn't look at David. She didn't look at Jessica. She looked straight ahead, towards the large glass doors that led to the terrace. "I'm fine," she said, her voice eerily calm. "I'm just leaving." "Good," David hissed, adjusting his bow tie. "And don't expect me home tonight." "I don't," Sarah whispered. She turned to walk away, but she didn't walk toward the exit. She walked towards the center of the room, stopping directly under the main chandelier. David laughed nervously. "Where is she going? The exit is that way. Sarah, you're going the wrong way." Sarah stopped. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She could feel the vibration before she heard the sound. It started as a low thrum in the floorboards, rattling the remaining champagne glasses on the tables. Thump, 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 thump. The liquid in the guests' glasses began to ripple. "What is that?" Mr. Henderson asked, looking up. The sound grew louder, a rhythmic, mechanical roar that drowned out the murmurs of the crowd. The wind outside began to pick up, whipping the heavy velvet curtains against the windows. Suddenly, floodlights from outside blasted through the terrace doors, blinding the guests. The roar was deafening now. A military-grade helicopter was hovering mere feet above the Plaza Hotel's terrace. David frowned, shielding his eyes. Who the hell is arriving this late? Sarah opened her eyes. She stood tall, her hand on her belly, the champagne-soaked dress suddenly looking like battle armor. She turned back to David, a small, sad smile playing on her lips. "They're not late, David," she said, her voice cutting through the sudden silence as the engines powered down. "They're right on time." The terrace doors didn't just open. They were thrown wide by two massive security guards wearing earpieces and suits that cost more than David's car. They stepped aside, scanning the room with lethal precision. The guests of the Merriweather Gala, usually so composed, craned their necks. Charles Blackwood, the billionaire host, stood up from his seat. He didn't look annoyed by the interruption. He looked respectful. He buttoned his jacket and bowed his head slightly towards the door. Then they walked in. 3 men. To call them handsome was an understatement. They were striking, but in a way that was terrifying. They moved with a predatory grace, a synchronized stride that consumed the space around them. They were dressed in bespoke Savile Row suits, charcoal, navy, and black, tailored to perfection. On the left was Thomas Kensington. He was the youngest brother, known in the tabloids as the London Brawler. He had a scar through his left eyebrow and eyes that looked like ice. He was scanning the room as if looking for a target to destroy. On the right was Arthur Kensington Jr., the middle brother. He was the charmer, the face of the company. But tonight his usually warm smile was gone, replaced by a jaw set so hard a muscle twitched in his cheek, and in the center was William Kensington, the eldest, the patriarch, the man who ran Kensington Logistics with an iron fist. He was a giant of a man, with broad shoulders and silver fox hair at his temples. His presence sucked the oxygen out of the room. When William Kensington entered a room, you didn't look at him. You looked at the floor until he gave you permission to look up. The room went deathly silent. Even the air conditioning seemed to pause. "My God," Mr. Henderson whispered, dropping his drink. "That's the Kensington brothers. All 3 of them. In New York." David's jaw dropped. He forgot about Sarah. He forgot about the auction. Panic was instantly replaced by a surge of delusional adrenaline. "The Kensingtons," David stammered to Jessica. "Jessica, look, it's them. They must be here for the merger. They must have heard I was handling the pitch." Jessica looked unsure. "David, they look angry." "Nonsense," David said, straightening his tie and slicking back his hair. "That's just how billionaires look. This is it. This is my moment. If I can shake William Kensington's hand, I'm made for life." David Miller, fueled by ego and blind to reality, stepped out of the crowd. He walked right into the center aisle, positioning himself directly in the path of the three approaching titans. He put on his best winning smile. He extended his hand. "Mr. Kensington," David announced, his voice booming. "David Miller, senior analyst at Sterling and Cooper. It is an absolute honor to welcome you to—" William Kensington didn't even blink. He didn't slow down. He didn't look at David's hand. He didn't look at David's face. He walked through him. William's shoulder clipped David's with the force of a battering ram, spinning David around like a top. David stumbled, nearly falling again, his hand left shaking in the empty air. "Hey!" David exclaimed, shocked. "I was speaking to you." Thomas, the youngest brother, stopped. He turned his head slowly to look at David. It was the look a lion gives a gazelle that has made a fatal error. "Speak again," Thomas said, his voice a low growl, "and I will buy your firm just to fire you." David froze, his mouth snapping shut. The three brothers continued their march. They weren't heading for the stage. They weren't heading for Mr. Blackwood. They were heading for the back of the room. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. The guests scrambled to get out of the way, sensing that something historic was happening. At the end of the aisle, standing alone amidst the shattered glass and spilled champagne, was Sarah. She looked small. Her dress was stained. Her cheek was bleeding. She was trembling. The three men stopped in front of her. The terrifying aura they projected, the anger, the power, the dominance, vanished instantly. Their shoulders slumped. Their faces softened into expressions of pure, agonizing heartbreak. "Sarah Bear," Arthur whispered, using her childhood nickname. The entire room watched in stunned confusion. Why were the kings of London talking to David Miller's mousy, poor wife? William, the intimidating CEO who made governments tremble, dropped to one knee. He didn't care about his $10,000 trousers touching the sticky floor. He reached out a hand, his fingers shaking slightly, and gently touched the cut on Sarah's cheek. "Who did this?" William asked. His voice was quiet, but it carried to every corner of the silent ballroom. It was a voice that promised violence. Sarah looked down at her big brother. The dam finally broke. The tears she had been holding back for 2 years, the pain of the rejection, the fear of the poverty. It all came rushing out. "Will," she sobbed. William wrapped his arms around her waist, burying his face in her baby bump. "We're here, Sarah, we're here. I'm so sorry we took so long." Arthur and Thomas moved in, creating a protective wall around her. Thomas took off his tuxedo jacket and draped it over her shoulders, covering the stained dress. Arthur pulled a silk handkerchief from his pocket and began to gently dab the blood from her face. "We got your text," Thomas said, his eyes scanning the room, looking for a threat. "We came straight from the airfield. We landed on the roof." David, watching from 10 feet away, felt his world tilting on its axis. His brain couldn't process the image. Sarah? His Sarah? The woman who clipped coupons? The woman who wore second-hand clothes? "Sarah?" David croaked, stepping forward tentatively. What is going on? Do you know them?" The three brothers froze. Slowly, methodically, they turned to face David. Sarah didn't look up. She kept her face buried in William's shoulder. William stood up. He towered over David. He adjusted his cuffs, his face returning to that mask of cold, imperious fury. "Do we know her?" William repeated the question, his voice dripping with incredulity. He stepped closer to David, invading his personal space. "You must be the husband, the one who hasn't answered our emails for 2 years, the one who isolated her." I, David stammered. "I'm David Miller. I'm her husband. I provide for her." "You provide?" Thomas laughed, a dark, humorless sound. He stepped up beside William. "You provide a walk-up in Queens and verbal abuse. We have eyes, little man. We have investigators." "Who are you people?" Jessica screeched from the sidelines, trying to regain control of the narrative. "Sarah is just a librarian. She's nobody." Mr. Blackwood, the host of the party, stepped forward then. He looked at Jessica with pity. "She isn't nobody, Miss Vance," Blackwood said clearly. "Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce you properly." He gestured to Sarah, who was being held up by Arthur. "This is not Sarah Miller. This is Lady Sarah Kensington, the sole heiress to the Kensington maternal estate and the co-owner of Kensington Logistics." A gasp ripped through the room. It was audible. People put hands over their mouths. "She is worth," Blackwood continued, looking directly at a pale David, "approximately $4 billion in her own right, excluding the family trust." David felt the blood drain from his face. His knees buckled. $4 billion. He had screamed at her for buying a $5 box of cereal. He had humiliated her for wearing a $30 dress. He had told her she was holding him back from success, and she was richer than everyone in this room combined. William Kensington took one step closer to David. The look in his eyes wasn't just anger, it was execution. "You pushed her," William said softly. "I saw the security footage from the hallway. I saw the way she fell. And just now, I saw the glass on the floor." "It was an accident," David squealed. "She fell. I love her." "You humiliated my sister," William said, his voice rising to a thunderous boom. "You made her bleed, and you did it while she is carrying my niece or nephew." William turned to Thomas. "Thomas?" "Yes, brother?" "Take this trash out of my sight, and call the lawyers. I want him evicted, fired, and sued for everything he will ever earn for the rest of his miserable life. Do it now." Thomas smiled. It was a terrifying smile. He cracked his knuckles and reached for David's collar. "With pleasure." As Thomas dragged a screaming David towards the exit, William turned back to the room. He looked at the gawking guests. "The party is over," William announced, "unless anyone else has something to say to my sister." Silence. "Good. Arthur, get the car. We're taking her home. To the real home." Sarah looked up at William, her eyes red. "Will I—" "Hush, love," William whispered, kissing her forehead. "You're safe now. The nightmare is over. You're a Kensington, and Kensingtons never bow their heads." He scooped her up into his arms, carrying her bridal style, and walked her out of the ballroom, leaving a room full of shattered glass and shattered egos in his wake. The silence inside the Rolls-Royce Phantom was a stark contrast to the chaos of the Plaza Hotel. The city lights of New York blurred past the tinted windows, streaks of gold and red against the rainy night. But inside, the air was still and scented with expensive leather and safety. Sarah sat in the middle, sandwiched between Arthur and Thomas. William sat opposite them, his long legs crossed, watching his sister with a hawk-like intensity that was terrifying to his enemies, but deeply comforting to his family. "Does it hurt?" Arthur asked softly, holding an ice pack to her cheek. "Only a little," Sarah lied. In truth, her heart hurt more than her face. The image of David's sneering face, the way he had pointed at her, the way he had dismissed their unborn child as a nuisance, it was a wound that no amount of ice could numb. "We're going to the penthouse," William announced, tapping a message onto his tablet. "I have Dr. Arrington meeting us there. She's the best OB-GYN on the East Coast. I want a full scan. Stress can be complications." Sarah looked down at her hands, still resting on her bump. "You didn't have to come," she whispered. "I was going to handle it. I was going to leave him." Thomas let out a short, incredulous breath. "Handle it?" "Sarah, you were living in a walk-up in Queens with a radiator that rattles. We had investigators tracking your debit card purchases. You were buying generic peanut butter. Generic." "I wanted to be normal," Sarah snapped, a flash of her old spirit returning. "I wanted to know what it was like to be loved without the Kensington name attached to it. I wanted to know if someone could love me for me," William softened. He leaned forward and took her hand. "And you found your answer, Sarah. It's a cruel answer, but it's the truth. Some men are small. They can't love anything that doesn't make them bigger. David didn't love you because he couldn't see you. He only saw what he thought was a reflection of his own failure. The car glided to a halt in front of a private entrance to a skyscraper on Park Avenue, the Kensington Tower. This wasn't just an apartment. It was a fortress in the sky. As they ascended in the private elevator, Sarah felt the weight of her normal life shedding away. The dingy apartment, the budgeting apps, the fear of the utility bill. It was all dissolving. But so was the dream of being just Sarah Miller, wife and mother. The elevator doors opened directly into the penthouse. It was a sprawling space of white marble, floor-to-ceiling windows, and modern art. A team of staff was already waiting. A maid stepped forward to take Thomas's jacket from Sarah's shoulders, replacing it with a cashmere blanket. Dr. Arrington was there, setting up a portable ultrasound machine on the plush velvet sofa. "Lady Sarah," the doctor said, her voice professional and soothing. "Let's get you checked out." For the next hour, Sarah was poked, prodded, and scanned. The brothers stood on the balcony, their silhouettes framed against the skyline, speaking in low, dangerous tones. Sarah knew they were plotting. The Kensington brothers didn't just get mad, they got even. "The baby is fine," Dr. Arrington finally declared, wiping the gel from Sarah's stomach. "Strong heartbeat. But your blood pressure is dangerously high, Sarah. You are malnourished and exhausted. You need absolute bed rest for the next 2 weeks. No stress, no drama." William walked back into the room as the doctor packed up. "Did you hear that? No stress. Hard to avoid stress when my husband just humiliated me in front of half of New York," Sarah muttered. "Ex-husband," William corrected. "The lawyers are drafting the papers as we speak. By morning you won't be married to David Miller. You'll be Sarah Kensington again." Sarah sat up, pulling the cashmere blanket tighter. He didn't know, Will. He really didn't know. "That's what makes it unforgivable," Arthur said, sitting on the arm of the sofa. "If he had known you were rich and treated you well, he would have been a gold digger. But he thought you were poor, and he treated you like trash. That proves his character. He abused the weak. He bullied the powerless. That is a sin we do not forgive." Sarah closed her eyes. She remembered the early days, the picnics, the laughter. How had it gone so wrong? "He's going to come looking for me," Sarah said. "He's going to realize what he lost. Not me, the money. He's going to try to apologize." Thomas turned from the window, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. His smile was razor-sharp. "Let him try," Thomas said. "I actually hope he does, because I haven't hit anyone in 6 months, and my knuckles are getting itchy." William shot Thomas a warning look. "We do this legally, Thomas. We destroy him systematically. We don't break his legs. We break his life." William knelt in front of Sarah again. "Go to sleep, sir. Tomorrow is going to be a very busy day. We have a reputation to rebuild, and you have a new life to start." Sarah nodded. The maid guided her to the master guest suite, a room larger than her entire apartment in Queens. She climbed into the bed, the sheets made of Egyptian cotton, so soft it felt like sleeping on a cloud. She picked up her phone. It had been blowing up with messages. "David, 12 missed calls. David, Sarah, pick up. David, where did you go? David, was that real? Are they really your brothers? David, baby, I'm sorry. I was drunk. The stress of the merger. Please. David, we're rich. Sarah, do you realize we can buy the firm? Call me." She stared at the last message. "We're rich. Not I love you. Not is the baby okay. We're rich." Sarah felt a tear slide down her cheek, but it wasn't a tear of sadness. It was a tear of finality. She blocked the number. She turned off the phone. She wasn't Sarah Miller anymore. She was a Kensington. And tomorrow, the wolf was coming to blow David's house down. The sun rose over Manhattan with a blinding clarity, but for David Miller, it was the darkest morning of his life. He had spent the night on a friend's couch because the locks to the apartment in Queens had already been changed. When he had tried to insert his key at 2 a.m., a large man in a dark suit had simply opened the door, handed him a box containing his suits and his toothbrush, and told him that if he returned, the police would be called for trespassing on Kensington property, evicted in 4 hours. But David was a man of delusion. As he put on his slightly wrinkled suit in the Penn Station bathroom, he convinced himself that this was salvageable. "She's pregnant," he told himself, staring at his bloodshot eyes in the mirror. "She's hormonal. She'll calm down. She loves me. And once she realizes that I can manage her fortune, that I can turn those billions into trillions, she'll thank me. I'm the father of her child. They can't shut me out." He adjusted his tie. He would go to the office. He would close the merger. He would show the Kensingtons that he was a businessman worthy of their respect. He walked into the offices of Archer and Holt at 8:45 a.m. He expected the usual morning buzz, interns running with coffee, phones ringing. Instead, the office was dead silent. As David walked past the reception desk, the receptionist, a woman named Linda, who usually greeted him with a smile, looked down at her desk, refusing to make eye contact. Her face was pale. "Morning, Linda," David said, trying to project confidence. She didn't answer. He frowned and walked towards the bullpen. Heads turned. Whispers erupted behind his back. He saw people pointing. "Did you see the video?" "Yeah, on YouTube. It has 3 million views already. Look at him. He's walking like he still works here." David's stomach twisted. Video? He reached his glass-walled office. He stopped. His nameplate was gone. Inside his office, sitting behind his desk, was a man he didn't recognize. The man was older, wearing a suit that looked like it was cut from steel wool, and reading a file with a bored expression. Standing in the corner of the office, looking terrified, was Jessica. She was holding a cardboard box filled with her belongings. "Excuse me," David stormed in. "Who are you, and why are you in my chair?" The older man looked up over his spectacles. "Mr. Miller, you're late. We expected you 10 minutes ago." "I work here," David shouted. "Get out of my office." "You worked here," the man corrected calmly. "My name is Silas Thorne. I am the lead counsel for Kensington Enterprises. As of 6 a.m. this morning, Kensington Enterprises has acquired a controlling interest in Archer and Holt." David froze. "What?" "We bought the firm, David," a voice came from the doorway. David spun around. Thomas Kensington was leaning against the doorframe, chewing on a toothpick. He looked relaxed, predatory, and utterly terrifying. "We bought it," Thomas continued, stepping into the room. "Cost us pocket change, really. Your partners were very eager to sell when we threatened to audit their offshore accounts." You bought my company?" David gasped. "We bought the building too," Thomas added casually, "and the coffee shop downstairs. I didn't like the way the barista looked at me." Thomas walked over to Jessica, who shrank back against the wall. "And you," Thomas said, looking at her with disdain. "Miss Pierce, the woman who likes to insult pregnant women. You're fired, obviously. But more than that, we've blacklisted you. No reputable firm in New York, London, or Tokyo will hire you. I hear there's a lovely opening for a telemarketer in New Jersey, though." Jessica burst into tears and ran out of the room, clutching her box. David stood alone, trembling. "Thomas, Mr. Kensington, please, let's talk about this. Man to man. I'm family." "You are a parasite," Thomas said, his voice dropping to a growl. "And we are the exterminators." Silas Thorne slid a stack of papers across the desk. "These are the divorce papers. You will sign them now." David looked at the stack. "I won't sign. I have rights. I want custody. I want alimony." "She was used to my standard of living," Thomas laughed. It was a loud, barking laugh that echoed through the silent office. "Your standard of living? You mean the poverty line? You want alimony based on your salary of $80,000 a year?" "Fine. We'll pay you, but here is what we will take." Silas flipped a page. "We have conducted a forensic audit of your finances, Mr. Miller. It appears you used Mrs. Kensington's credit card, which she thought was a joint account for emergencies, to pay for online gambling debts. That is fraud. I was going to pay it back. We also have footage of you at the gala, Silas continued. Assault, battery, emotional distress, defamation of character. If you do not sign these papers, relinquishing all parental rights and all claims to the Kensington estate, we will press charges. You will go to prison, David. Not a white-collar resort. Prison. David looked at Thomas. He saw no mercy in those eyes. He saw the end of the road. If I sign, David whispered, what do I get? Thomas reached into his pocket and pulled out a check. He flicked it onto the desk. It landed face up. David looked at it. It was a check for $300. What is this? The cost of your tuxedo rental, Thomas said, since you were so worried about the money. That clears your debt. You leave with nothing. No job, no wife, no child, no reputation. David stared at the check. The weight of his failure crashed down on him. He had held a diamond in his hand, and he had thrown it away because he wanted a shiny piece of glass. Sign it, Thomas commanded. With a shaking hand, David picked up the pen. He signed his name. He signed away his son. He signed away the billions. He signed away his future. Good, Thomas said, snatching the papers. Security. 2 burly guards appeared at the door. Escort Mr. Miller out of the building, Thomas ordered, and take his shoes. His shoes, David stammered. They're company property now, Thomas grinned. We bought the dress code, too. 5 minutes later, David Miller stood on the sidewalk of Wall Street in his socks. It was raining. Passers-by stared at the man in the expensive suit with no shoes, holding a check for $300, crying into his hands. Above him, on the 40th floor, Thomas Kensington watched from the window. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number. It's done, William, Thomas said. The rat is in the gutter. Good, William's voice came through the line. Now come home. Sarah is asking for strawberry ice cream, and I don't know which brand to buy. Coming, brother. Thomas hung up. He looked at the skyline. The Kensingtons protected their own, and David Miller had just learned the most expensive lesson of his life. When you marry a woman, you better make sure you treat her like a queen, because you never know when her army might show up. 6 months later, the snow had melted, giving way to a lush, vibrant spring. In the private wing of Mount Sinai Hospital, a wing entirely funded by the Kensington Trust, the atmosphere was frantic. For all their billions, for all their corporate ruthlessness and global power, the 3 Kensington brothers were currently reduced to nervous wrecks. William was pacing the hallway, barking orders into his phone to buy a diamond mine, simply to distract himself. Arthur was hyperventilating in a chair, clutching a bouquet of blue hydrangeas. Thomas, the brawler, looked the most terrified of all, flinching every time a nurse walked past the door. Inside the suite, Sarah was the calmest one. She was glowing, her health fully restored, her skin radiant, fed by months of peace, organic food, and the unconditional love of her family. One more push, Lady Sarah, Dr. Arrington urged gently. With a final surge of strength, the cry of a newborn pierced the air. It was a strong, loud cry, the cry of a Kensington. It's a boy, the doctor announced, smiling. Sarah collapsed back onto the pillows, sweat matting her hair, tears of pure joy streaming down on her face. Let me see him. They placed the baby on her chest. He was perfect. He had dark hair and eyes that seemed to observe the room with an ancient wisdom. The door burst open. The brothers rushed in, abandoning all dignity. They crowded around the bed, these titans of industry silenced by the sight of 7 pounds of life. He's so small, Thomas whispered, his voice cracking. He reached out a finger, and the baby's tiny hand gripped it instinctively. Thomas, the man who had terrified Wall Street, burst into tears. What's his name? William asked, his voice thick with emotion. Sarah looked at her son, then at her brothers. Leo, she smiled. Leo Arthur William Kensington. And the father? Arthur asked gently, a shadow passing over his face. He has 3 fathers, Sarah said firmly, looking at her brothers. He will never need anyone else. Meanwhile, across the city, in a cramped, grease-stained break room of a fast food joint in the Bronx, a man sat on a milk crate. David Miller looked 10 years older. His hairline was receding, his face gaunt. He wore a uniform that smelled of old fryer oil. He scrolled through his cracked phone during his 5-minute break. A news alert popped up. Breaking. Lady Sarah Kensington welcomes baby boy. The heir to the Kensington fortune is born. First photos show the family glowing with happiness. David stared at the photo. Sarah looked like a queen, and there, wrapped in a blanket worth more than David's entire life earnings, was the son he would never know. "Miller, get back on the fryer," his manager shouted. David dropped the phone. It shattered on the floor. He didn't bother to pick it up. He just put his head in his hands and wept, the sound drowned out by the sizzle of cheap grease. He had held the world in his hands, and he had traded it for an illusion. The story of Sarah and David isn't just a drama. It's a mirror. It forces us to ask ourselves, who do we value? Do we love people for their status, their potential, and what they can give us? Or do we love them for their soul? David Miller made the fatal mistake of valuing the packaging over the gift. He thought he was humiliated by a poor wife. But in reality, he humiliated himself by failing to see the Queen standing right in front of him. In the end, the Kensington brothers didn't just save Sarah with their money. They saved her with their loyalty. And that is a currency that never devalues. Wow! Talk about immediate karma. What do you think? Did David deserve that ending? Or was it too harsh? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. If this story gave you chills, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. And if you want more stories about hidden identities and billionaire justice, make sure you subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you'll never miss a twist. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next story.